So we need to work on both things. We need to be able to provide affordable housing for people in our community. We need to keep our natural areas. And we also need to provide for safety in our community. There's been a lot of accidents in our community lately. A young man was just injured yesterday, a Poudre High School student, and this really concerns me as a mother. We need to make sure that we're keeping our community safe.
Thank you. Jerry Horak.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I think what we need to remember is that Fort Collins has had a long history of actually planning for growth and to make sure we maintain the quality. We have a series of plans and a series of agreements. One of the most important ones is our agreement with Larimer County, which was the first one established in Colorado, I don't know if the nation, but it was one of the early ones, which says if something develops outside the city boundaries but inside the growth management area, which is an area that the city worked with the county and ascribed some years ago, that development has to be developed to urban standards. So that means, and has to be annexed when it's contiguous to the city. So that means you end up having things done the way things are done in the city for new development. That means you have parkland fees being paid, you have capital improvement fees being paid, you have all sorts of fees that have been established in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to make sure that growth does pay for its way. So that's a critical agreement, and those who say we simply don't do that with the county, I don't know what they're talking about, because then things would develop out in the county not to urban standards, and we'd basically have something called Timnath or LaPorte or Southern Wellington for that matter. That's not a good idea. So we have a bunch of plans also, as has been mentioned, that also provides for that quality growth. We have plans dealing with open space, recreation, we have plans for trails, we have plans for water. So we've set the stage to make sure we do things the way it was planned and fees are collected and growth pays its way.
Thank you. Carl Longthick.
Thank you, Kevin. Certainly we need to make quality of life the priority, and we need to make growth responsible and make that a requirement. We need to protect the environment that we live in and remember that we are not separate from it. Therefore, protecting open space becomes a priority. Protecting the quality of the air in Fort Collins becomes a priority. Obviously, we're going to need to get people around, so we're going to need more multimodal transportation, and somebody's going to have to start planning a future light rail solution to reduce traffic and the consequent emissions both between here and Denver and between here and the other side of town, which is now getting to be about a half hour away from where I live. We need to support the neighborhoods and ensure them that all the development that comes into that neighborhood is good development for them. The notion of having plans for growth outside the city in accordance with an agreement with the county is good. But if the city changes those standards, as they have recently, and reduces them severely, then we don't have good standards here, and we won't have good standards out there either. We also, of course, need to pursue affordable housing plans. That is a real tough issue to deal with. We have to keep working on that for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Ward Luthie.
First of all, I'd like to thank you to the Coloradoan for inviting us and everybody for coming out tonight. Before I start, I just want to re-emphasize that my name is Ward Luthie. We've had trouble with that throughout the campaign, just to make sure that we got that down. But we can talk a lot about, we repeat the questions about what we're going to do, but in terms of what we have to do, I do part-time work at REI, and I drove home to get my nice coat on and come back here. And there really wasn't anything going on in the community, but it took me forever to get to where I live on the north side of town and get back. And there was a song playing that says, "Don't take your life for granted." And what it made me think about is we cannot take our city for granted. And we have a growth issue because we have maintained the high quality of life that makes people want to come here. To say that we need just to have balanced growth doesn't answer the question. We have to paint a specific picture of how big we are willing to grow and then decide from that how we're going to design our cities. I do not want to add another 100,000 people. I don't want to add another 50,000 people. That's going to take leadership. It's going to take our council, our mayor standing up and saying, we are going to decide our own destiny. We are not going to let, for example, a stadium come in and change the entire character of what Fort Collins is today.
Please hold your applause until the end of the debate. Thank you. Discussion, not a debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ward. Mike Prusnick.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, CSU. My name is Mike Prusnick, candidate for mayor. For a minute, let's just ignore the growth management area and think about what it means to double the population over the next 20 years. That means if we don't do any changes, we're going to have to double the number of lanes for cars, double the number of lanes for bikes, double the size of the sidewalks. And it doesn't take long to figure out that there's not enough room to do that. So then we're going to have to shrink the footprint of the buildings and make them 4 times as tall. There's a hard, complicated question here. There's not enough room for everything that we need. Or maybe we do double-decker freeways. Growth is a big issue. And to just let growth happen uncontrolled without thinking about it, let the developers come in and do what makes them the most profit is not necessarily what's in the best interest of our community. What we need to look at is solutions with community involvement. We have a city plan right now that says, and we have a Harmony plan and Midtown plan, and they say things like you can have 6, 8, 10-story buildings, 2 levels of underground parking, all up and down the Mason corridor, all south of Harmony along that line. And the question is that what you, the people, want to do for growth? And the data I'm seeing so far says no. The Nature in the City program, the #1 reason for doing that is to counteract the impacts of going urban. The State of the City address has a number of things where you say you want to stay small, you want to have intimate activities, you don't want big stadiums, you don't want big tall buildings. And so for me, it's all about community engagement and understanding what you want smart growth to look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade Troxel.
I'm Wade Troxel. I'm running for mayor to provide a vibrant community for all of Fort Collins citizens. I grew up in Fort Collins, and I remember back when it was 30,000 people when I was a kid, and now it's 155,000 people. It was a great community then, and it's even a better community today, and not because of just a number. It's really because of it's a caring community, it's a friendly community. If you talk to people that are new to our community, they say how people say hello, look them in the eye, they care for each other. And so I think there's a lot of things that really do make a community and the quality of life. As a city, being on city council for the last 8 years, I've seen how the city council deliberates and also looking back at leadership in the past and through city plan and a number of other things. Basically, growth doesn't take over. Basically, we need to be intentional in terms of how we approach our future. As a chair of the Futures Committee, we've looked at what it means for build-out. And I think being intentional and understanding, we can actually guide the direction as to where things go in terms of the amenities, the facilities, and those sorts of things that we define as our quality of life. And I think it comes down to the people that makes this a wonderful community, and I think we can't lose sight of that.
Thank you. Now we have some questions that are specific to council races. We'll start with District 2, which covers the east central part of the city. The redevelopment of Foothills Mall is expected to bring major changes to Midtown. What would you like Midtown to look like in 10 years in terms of residential and commercial development, and how should the city reach that vision? And we'll start with Ray.
Well, I believe that my philosophy is that there's a 3-prong approach. I think there has to be balance between our economy, our environment, and our quality of life. So keeping those things in check are important as Midtown grows. And maybe a business improvement district is an idea where we can take care of ourselves and how we develop, how we improve that district. Because I think there's a great chance, and you hit it right on the head when you talk about mixed use, residential and business, and the economy that it stimulates from there. That's important because, you know, in our city and our state, we're about 80% of our businesses are small business people. So consequently, small business is big business for Fort Collins. When you think about it in those terms, it's the mom and pop shops that really have to survive and are trying to survive. And if we have more downtown or midtown livability mixed in with business associations, I think that works. And I think it can work well. I visualize not big boxes, I visualize small storefronts. I visualize more of the mom and pop shops because of the Foothills Mall and the way it's developing. I visualize the ability for people to walk to these communities and be able to have their own destination routes and easy trails and paths that gets them to their destinations, so it's not complicated or difficult for them to get to the different places.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, the Midtown area does have its own distinct characteristics and its own feel. And I think that's something that has developed very naturally in Fort Collins. So I think that has to be something that we take into account, a place where we start in this development. However, I believe that when I say we, that is making an assumption that I'm going to be in a position to make those decisions. But actually, I don't mean that these decisions should just be made by people in power. This development of this area must incorporate the input of the people who live in that area and the people who utilize the shops and businesses that are there. That would be most everybody in Fort Collins. So I would really like to see much greater public input into those decisions and processes that bring the input and also utilize that input as part of the decision making.
Thank you. We'll now move to District 4, which covers southwest Fort Collins. MAX and the South Transit Center have improved the availability of bus service to some South Fort Collins residents. What transportation issues remain in your district, and how should the city address them? And let's start with Eric.
Thank you. I've mentioned that I hear a lot about growth. Another topic that I hear a lot about as I talk to my neighbors in my district are trains and traffic. People have a lot of frustration related to that. By the way, MAX is getting good reviews in my district. People really enjoy it and like it. But in terms of trains and traffic, I think that we need to continue to focus on that. A couple of weeks ago, I went and I visited the city's Traffic Operations Center, and it really is amazing. A giant video display, real-time traffic control and monitoring, and it's very impressive. And equally impressive was the staff there. And I think they really understand and appreciate the frustrations that we have. And of course, some of the constituents in District 4 are on the very edge of the city, so they get to enjoy the fruits or the detriments of traffic problems. And the city staff is really working hard to improve that. The staff proposed 2 enhancements in the current budget cycle. One was to add staff. They're doing good work there, they just need to do more of it. More staff will help. The other thing that they're doing is looking at how the city and the trains and traffic interacts. And it's truly amazing the amount of data that they've collected. And I think we've all felt the situation with trains is bad and getting worse, and they have the data to prove that. And I'm not sure if that makes me feel good or not. It'd be nice if it was all in my head, but it's not. And there are some real challenges there, and we need to continue to make those things a budget priority in our city.
Thank you. Kristen?
Sure. Living on the west side of town, we do have to deal with the train a lot, getting to work or even really getting to the hospital in emergency situations. And so a lot of people in my district are concerned about not being able to get past the train when there's an emergency situation. I talked to a family in my district, and their daughter has asthma, and they've had to wait at the train 15, 20 minutes sometimes while their daughter's having an asthma attack. And that's really concerning to me. So I think that we need to look, when we're looking at infrastructure needs, we need to look at some kind of underpass that goes under the trains. I think this is highly possible, especially at least one that emergency vehicles can get under, so we don't have families that are waiting at train tracks in emergency situations. And I also want to make sure that people in my district are connected to better connected to the max, so better bus lines that connect people to the max. People in our district really do like the max, they want to use it more. But people in Ridgewood Hills, they have trouble getting to the max. They don't have a bike path that can get there, so they like to see something like that. So really probably trying to get people to multi-modes of transportation better, and then making sure that the people who need to use their cars can get past that train traffic. Those are big issues in my district.
Thank you. For those just joining us on CTV Channel 11, we're talking to the 9 candidates who are running for Fort Collins City Council in the April 7th municipal election. We're now going to move to the candidates from District 6, which covers Northeast Fort Collins. Colorado State University's impact on the Fort Collins community is likely to change in the coming years as its student population increases and the university builds new facilities. Your district certainly will be affected by those changes. What role does the city play in addressing CSU's growth? Jerry?
Thank you, Kevin. CSU and the city have worked together, especially over the last few years. The current administration of Dr. Frank has actually reached out and done a lot more than previously. Other administrations did a lot of talk, but they never really did that much if they had to do anything, actually. So one of the things I've done too is over the last 4 years, I met with Dr. Frank periodically. First year was spent on housing. The last 3 years has spent a lot on the stadium issue. Our staff too regularly meets with the facility folks at CSU to try to coordinate the different projects that are going to be happening on campus, what sort of impacts they'll have on the community. As all know about the stadium issue, our staff worked for the last 2 years intensively to make sure that the impacts were looked at and to see what could be done for the hard cost, which the agreement coming up the council will be considering deals with, to really take a look at how we can work together. And I believe they have been committed. With other administrations, when there'd be housing projects, they'd be committed until they actually had to do something to mitigate. And Mr. Luthi even remembers one around where he lived where that was the case. So we've worked with them and continue to work with them. And the only way that we can do it is through relationships and cooperation. That's why I tried to make sure I established a relationship with Dr. Frank and his administration, because our ability to tell CSU what to do is very limited. Our ability to work with them as a partner is very great. And their facility plan, like I said, we know about that. We see the changes. Dr. Frank comes twice a year to City Council to update us on what's happening. And there's a regular interchange among our staff and theirs, as well as we have a CSU committee that I'm sure Mr. Troxel will talk about later that's working actively with one of the board members as well as Dr. Frank on these issues.
Thank you. Carl?
Thank you. All 3 of my children are CSU grads, and I'm very grateful for that. In terms of student population, we may or may not see a rise. Dr. Frank says it is stagnant at this moment. However, it would be nice if more students lived on campus as far as folks in District 6 are concerned. I suggest an IGA, not for a stadium, but for some housing. There are 12 residence halls on campus that have now been repurposed or unused for that purpose. They could house 3,000 more students. We'll see if CSU would like to agree with that. The stadium situation, however, is unfortunate. I've likened it to a situation of an individual with a broken leg. First broken when president of CSU created a decision-making process that absolutely banned neighbors from any participation. That hurt. Then we were pounded for 3 years with marketing and phony committees, more hurt. A second leg broke when 4 council members, including my opponent, collaborated in repeatedly silencing the public's voice, vote after vote on this issue. That hurt the worst. To fix the breaks requires a new council leadership, and new CSU leadership. Then we can move forward.
Again, please kindly hold your applause. Thank you.
We'll now move on to the candidates running for mayor. All 3 will answer the question. In recent years, Fort Collins has provided millions of dollars in public support for development projects such as Foothills Mall and Woodward's corporate campus. Should the city continue encouraging economic development, and if so, should that include tax-funded incentives? And we'll start with Ward.
I'm going to start off with, I thought I heard my name. Did you mention My name? Thank you very much for that. It's all the publicity we can get is good. But in terms of Tony Frank in the stadium, I'll speak to that first. But Jerry and I have known each other a long time, and at the last council session talking about the intergovernmental agreement, Mr. Horak said that we should just be happy that CSU is even talking to us. I don't consider that to be a good neighbor when one person comes in and ignores everybody at CSU, all the people in the community of Fort Collins, ignores that we could rebuild Hughes for $30 million and wants to build a $500 million stadium on campus. At this point, you know, this agreement was done in 1956-57. I think it's imperative that as leaders we stand up and say this is our community. If he's going to be a good neighbor, it's not CSU, it's Tony Frank. We need to stand up and say what's good for Fort Collins. I am not willing to accept, you know, just that they may or may not talk to us. On other issues, I do have a background in urban planning. I run a hiking company. I've traveled over the world for the last 30 years. I've seen what works and what does not. The reality is we cannot have unlimited growth and maintain our quality of life. The idea, it's like a canoe. You're going down a canoe, you're paddling, which I like to canoe, and there's a waterfall and everybody's having a good time. The reality is you have to get out of the river. You have to stop. You cannot just be happy going over the river. So there is a limit. It is not, numbers do count. I mean, we cannot have 200, 300,000 people. I like walking by the Poudre River. I like the clean air. I do not want to be walking along the Poudre River next to 400 people. The reality of this whole election is if we want to maintain our quality of life, we have to do things differently. There are going to be some hard decisions. It's not all going to be great, but that's the only way we're going to keep what we have today. This is my home. This is our home. I want to stay here.
Thank you. Please, no applause. Please, no applause until the end of the meeting. Mike, do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Should the city continue encouraging economic development, and if so, should that include tax-funded incentives?
On how to proceed forward with economic development, the way I like to think about it is businesses are for-profit companies, and therefore they should make a profit, they should be self-sustainable. If they want taxpayer funding, they should be a nonprofit organization and be providing services like nonprofit organizations. The question of where it gets tricky is when we look at what our goals are for a city. And for example, I will look at some deals that I think we did really well on. The Valley Steel deal, the Fournier deal, and the Jack's deal I really liked. In particular, to sum up the Jack's deal real quickly, you know, they were annexed in from the county, they had a viable business model, and it was our development fees and our overhead that really caused problems for them. So by giving them a finance mechanism where they could finance the overhead that we put on them as a government, our burden, that allowed them to stay in town, that allowed them to continue and execute their profitable business plan. But when I think at things that we've been doing on the bigger scale, North College Marketplace, for example, was essentially a greenfield, and by tax funding King Soopers, we put Albertsons out of business, and I don't like the idea of the government picking the winners and losers. I think the free market should do that. The people should do that with the power of their purse. The Summit is a program in which we took $1 million loss on, and in order to cover the URA, we had to lower our lending standards from the city to support that. With Woodward, that was a golf course that's pretty close to Greenfield, and we came and gave them $25 million for that economic development. Avago, we gave them one deal, then we came in with a second deal, and we found out basically the day of council reading that it wasn't actually economic incentive, that they'd actually started purchasing the stuff 6 months prior to that, and it was really a thank you gift. And so when it comes to economic development, I think we need to focus on how do we lower the overhead and the cost for all businesses, not pick the winners and losers. And if we do that, we can have a healthy economy that will be recession-proof or at least recession-resistant. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
Yes, our economic health is important to our community, and it always has been. There are some tools that are necessary at times and used judiciously. The Urban Renewal Authority, which has been used on North College, a lot of public infrastructure to that part of town that has been neglected, I think, for well too long. But you're seeing the benefits of that part of the community being incorporated into Fort Collins. The mall development project, and one of the things that I think is being misrepresented with some of this discussion is tax increment financing is that tax increment that wouldn't have been there unless there was the private investment that improved the property to that point. And so it's not a trade-off, it's not a handoff, it's really an investment by the private sector, and the public sector component goes for public infrastructure. So a lot of the connection to the MAX and the underground tunnel that will go under College Avenue and a lot of the streets and other utilities are the aspect that are part of the public component of a URA. And I would say the Woodward Governor is an important aspect to really the development of the northeast portion of our community, the finishing of the Lincoln Corridor, which has been a long time really without curb and gutter, is now finally becoming a part of our community. And it really connects the northeast quadrant, which is the Mountain Vista sub-area of our community. And so if you talk about traffic and that sort of thing, you don't address those things without some sort of engagement. And if with the private sector and the public-private partnerships, that's imperative. And these are just examples of some tools that can be used to enable that.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to the lightning round questions. Sorry about that. In this round, we're looking for short answers to complex questions, which I know you all enjoy. You'll have 30 seconds to answer. And this has been mentioned by some of the candidates already, but I'll give everyone a shot since it is such a hot topic. The city and CSU are working on an intergovernmental agreement regarding CSU's on-campus stadium. You might have heard of it. The current council is scheduled to vote on the agreement next week. At this point, how do you think the city should address the stadium? And we'll start with Ray.
It's always me.
It's simple for me.
Well, the intergovernmental agreement obviously is a very big document. There's a lot of details, and like we always like to say, the devil's in the details. I think we got to ask the question, why? And that's what the public's asking, is why.
Thank you. Nancy?
I have some concerns about the speed with which this process is going on, and I believe that when you're trying to solve such complex and difficult problems, sufficient time should be given to it so that you come up with good solutions.
Thank you. Eric?
I was just at the open house hosted by the city at the Drake Center just before walking over here. And in talking with staff, I understand that there may be some things that are presented to the CSU team that's meeting tomorrow. Until I see the final, I'm reluctant to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Thank you. Kristen?
I think the open house was a good place to start to see how the community members feel about the intergovernmental agreement. If they're not for it and it doesn't provide for enough mitigations for their neighborhoods, I think we should go back to the drawing board with it and make sure that we're listening to the people in the surrounding neighborhoods.
Thank you. Jerry?
This agreement has been 2 years in the making. Our staffs have been working with CSU staffs for 2 years. The agreement puts most of the duty on CSU, very little duty on the city of Fort Collins. CSU on nearly every element that has hard dollar costs has agreed to pay for it. They don't have to. So to wait to sign the agreement makes no sense to me whatsoever. That we need to have this is the first of a series of agreements, and it's actually an historic agreement. There has never been an intergovernmental agreement between CSU and the city, and this is the chance.
Thank you. Carl?
Not true. If this were a 2-year process, this would be a lot better agreement. It is full of vagaries. Doesn't look like agreements other cities have done with universities, because I've looked at a lot of them. Take a look at Minnesota's. It was a 3-year process. They've got about a 40-page agreement. This is not the kind of thing we need. We need to get this to the people to have their involvement in a decision on this project.
Thank you. Ward?
I think it's pretty simple. We should stop the stadium. An intergovernmental agreement, first of all, is not enforceable, but it's kind of like someone coming and saying, we're going to take your house away and you get to decide, you know, how we're going to pick up the pieces afterwards. We should stop it.
Thank you. Mike?
The IGA, the draft IGA available, is not ready for prime time. It is full of vagueness. It is full of things. I fear that we're going to end up in court more arguing over who gets what than we're going to do. And yes, we need to stop the stadium. I just came from the IGA meeting. You probably recognize me. I was this guy wearing the Stop the Stadium sign, as well as the list of tools we have in our toolbox to stop this stadium. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
Well, I've been critical last three years as Dr. Frank has come to City Council at work sessions. I believe the IGA is a good first start in getting some commitments with the university and the city, and it's well beyond what we've had previously, and we need to keep Colorado State University accountable as we go forward.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with you again, Ray. Do you support the capital improvement program and sales tax extension described in ballot issue number 1, or as it's also known, Bob 2.0?
Well, there are some differences. I think there's things that we'd like to see differently in them. For the most part, yes.
Nancy?
This is an issue on which the people will speak, and they will have the final word as to whether we continue with that or not. I agree that it's got some very strong points and some other areas that people disagree with. We can always find things to disagree with.
Thank you. Eric?
On my walk over here, I walked past the gardens on Spring Creek. That's part of the legacy of this capital improvement tax. I think it's great what it brings to our city. I will be voting for it, and I urge you to also. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen?
Okay, sorry. I think everybody has things about Bob 2 that they like. My 2 favorite things are safe routes to everywhere. I think we need to make sure we do have safe routes to everywhere. And the second thing that I really like about it is more money for affordable housing, because I think that's long overdue.
Thank you. Jerry?
The answer is yes, I support it. It's the 6th major capital improvement tax since the 1970s that's gone to the voters. Each of the other 5 have passed overwhelmingly. I think this one will pass too. I think it has a lot of good things. The idea is for safe routes for school, not school, safe routes to everywhere was an idea I came up with instead of just safe routes to school. The Housing Affordability Fund, the same way. I'm the guy who tries to figure out solutions to issues, listens to ideas, and tries to come up with things that make sense.
Thank you. Carl?
Definitely a city vote is the way to go. That's terrific. I'll vote yes. And then afterward, I'm going to try to get some things like east-west overpasses and a few other things through the council to help the District 6 that I'm going to support.
Thank you. Ward?
Overall, yes.
Thanks. Mike?
I guess I'll be the outlier here. I'm supporting no on Bob 2 in April and yes on Bob 2.1 in November. The current Bob 1 doesn't expire till December. We have time. I'm concerned that 45% of the projects and 35% of the money are going to downtown-centric projects. If you look at the general fund budget, there's an over amount of money going downtown. We need to have more disbursements around that. We don't know what the stadium's going to cost us yet, and we shouldn't be voting on Bob 2 until we have a better chance of that. And I'd like to see Bob 2.1 with some more future-oriented projects than what we have in the current plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
Issue number 1, or the Bob 2, is a long line of capital improvement projects that have all been successful, and the city has delivered on all those, and they feed directly into our quality of life that we enjoy so much. So yes, I will be supporting the Bob 2 issue number 1 on the ballot.
Thank you. So the third question is, again, we'll start with you, Ray. Would you consider changes to the city's 3 unrelated ordinance, also known as U+2, as a way to create additional housing opportunities?
Absolutely. I've always felt like that the ordinance itself was pretty discriminatory against students in particular. So I think there has to be some modification. There has to be a little bit of change. So with flexibility, of course, and also consider for the neighborhoods. I understand that concern as well, but I think there's a better way of doing it.
Thank you. Nancy?
I think U+2 has served a very good purpose in the neighborhoods in which it's situated. I know there was great concern on the part of people who were living next door to a house with 6 people. So I would be hesitant to see it changed without having a viable alternative.
Thank you. Eric?
I support the occupancy limit. It is not perfect, but I do think it has improved neighborhood quality, and so I would continue to support the concept. Because it's not perfect, of course, I'm always willing to have a conversation, engagement, find out what's working, what isn't, figure out how we can improve both the occupancy limit and the nuisance ordinance enforcement.
Thank you. Kristen?
I do support U+2. It's good for neighborhoods, and these are meant to be single-family neighborhoods, not dorm areas in most cases, and so I do support it. I do think there is a process right now in which people can get a waiver if they need to, and so maybe that's something we can look at, especially maybe for seniors who need more affordable housing options, but in general, I do support U+2 and don't want to see any changes.
I strongly support U+2. It's been one of the best things that happened to help change neighborhoods in a positive way, as well as low interest rates, that have families move back into those houses, to not make them commercial property, which is far more valuable than folks who live there and have a family. I think what we do need to do is have a systematic enforcement of U+2. We have now only a complaint enforcement. We need to have systematically look at our code enforcement and do a much better job that does not put the burden on individual homeowners or our neighbors to complain about someone else.
Thank you. Carl?
No changes. As Kristen says, U+2 has some variances which can help us out with affordable housing, but no major changes. I would also support a landlord code of responsibility that could assist us in the kind of enforcement Mr. Horick's talking about.
Thank you. Ward?
I support the overall concept of U+2. I actually moved from, I sold my house based on a lot of the problems that were associated with numerous people, but it wasn't because it was the number of people, it was because of the behaviors and the activities that came from that. So if we're going to deal with affordable housing and everything else, we have to be able to have some way to take care of the people, elderly, low income, that can do a good job and live together peacefully.
Thank you. Mike?
We definitely have an overcrowding problem in some neighborhoods, a behavior problem in some neighborhoods, and we definitely need a tool to address that. I'm not sure U+2 is the right tool. I worry about it because it allows, a married couple with 10 children to live in a house, but then you can't have 4 unrelated college adults living in that same house. And so I don't think it really serves our purposes from a point of liberty, a point of consistency in the law, and I'd like to see something that addresses the overcrowding with consistency. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
I think we need to open the discussion with regards to the 3 unrelated. I think as we talk about affordable housing, there are more than 1,000 bedrooms in 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom houses that are currently not legally occupied as a part of our housing stock. And so I think from an affordable housing perspective as well as other perspectives, the other thing is when it was implemented, there was the nuisance ordinance that was implemented at the same time. So trying to tease out whether or not it was the nuisance ordinance or whether it's 3 unrelated, the data is not clear.
Thank you. This is a topic that some candidates have already touched on, but again, I'll ask everyone. Trains and the traffic delays that they cause are problems in Fort Collins. At the expense of tens of millions of dollars, should the city build overpasses or underpasses of railroad tracks at key intersections? Ray?
That kind of money, you're probably going to have to go to the voters on that one. And I think the voters, my guess is they're overwhelmingly are going to support something like that. That's because there's been such an irritant in the way it's caused congestion and the noise, period.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, there has been a dramatic increase in the amount of time that cars are delayed by trains, the length of the trains. I believe some kind of solution has to be found, and I think it's going to need to be the result of some very careful study and a great deal of input from people who have expertise, and then a decision made by the people.
Thank you. Eric?
The current transportation master plan includes 3 grade separated crossings. I think that we should continue to keep those on our plan. it is going to cost millions, so it's a long-range thing, and we need to begin thinking about funding for those. They're just so important for our community.
Thank you. Kristen?
I do think we need to look at the idea of underpasses, as I said before. I think underpasses, as I understand it, talking with transportation people, are much cheaper than overpasses, so that's probably the way to go. And if we put them on streets that aren't quite as busy, I think they could be even cheaper. Also, maybe an app that would let people know when the train's coming or where the train stopped. That might be helpful too. Let's use technology to make our lives better.
Thanks. Jerry?
I would suggest that we need a community conversation over the next year to take a look at this issue. We're talking about to have any significant number of overpasses, underpasses, you're talking $300 to $400 million, really. And so you need 4 series of 10-year taxes that would have to be done to really do it effectively. So that's what I think we need to have, the community conversation. The other part of that is the idea of tolling, which was brought up to one of the citizens to me at one of my sessions, and that could probably pay for half of it. So you could have a tax for half that amount, and half of it, people who use it pay for it.
Thanks. Carl?
Not conversation. We need an emergency underpass right now, as soon as possible. And we can get the train silenced if we want to. I have contact with Carl Smith, who helped Castle Rock do that. We need to get him in contact with Representative Polis when he arrives here the 1st of April. Get those 2 folks together. They've done it before. They could do it again.
Thank you. Ward?
We definitely need to do something very quickly. I mean, we have some emergency vehicle problems and concerns. We don't want to have some people dying because of that. Underpasses, I think, are the best. But overall, we need to also consider why we have this problem. We have this problem because we have way too many people here now. We're going to continue to have a problem and continue to have to pay unless we deal with the growth in a very specific, hard way.
Thank you. Mike?
I agree, we need to get a couple underpasses in immediately. The emergency need is there, it's critical, and one of the things I would like to see in a Bob 2.1 is money to do a couple underpasses. Troutman and Spring Creek, the train runs above grade next to College. It's doable. And as northern Colorado grows, the number of trains are going to double, the delays are going to double. Overpasses are unsightly. It's a lot of energy to get cars up and under them. We need to try to look at that. And and I think really long term, we actually need to look for the government to move the trains, not just keep them here, because it's not going to be effective.
Thank you. Wade?
Well, I was at the Federal Railroad Administration just day before yesterday and talking about a number of these things. In terms of grade separated crossings, they're very expensive, and it might be easy to say, let's just do it, but it's not that easy. I agree that we need to have much more of a community dialogue with respect to that, and I don't think our public's at risk at this point.
Thank you. So I have one more question, possibly 2. We'll see how we're doing pretty well on time, actually. So, Ray, what do you think about paid on-street parking in downtown?
When I was a policeman years ago, as a young rookie, one of my jobs was to go collect the parking meters. And he had to unlock the key with his bucket and drop. We got rid of them because it didn't work well. So now we're revisiting for paid parking on the street. I'm not convinced that works well. I think it can be done by private enterprise in another way. Time's up.
Thank you. Nancy?
I wonder why we need paid on-street parking when we have parking garages downtown where you pay for parking for a certain amount of time. And I hate to see people decide not to go downtown because they don't have the coins in their pocket or the money to pay for the parking.
Thank you. Eric?
Thank you. I'm really concerned about our Old Town merchants, and I think that part of what makes Fort Collins great is the variety of merchants and that they're local and they have character. And I've had merchants express to me concern about paid parking. So I really am concerned about the impact on our merchants and would want to make sure that before we implemented a paid parking program that we really get lots of input from them.
Thank you. Kristen?
Right now, I think there's a parking commission that's looking at this, and I think it's made up of merchants in Old Town, and I'd like to see what they come up with. I mean, I think that they'll they'll probably come up with some good solutions, and then we can take that to the people and see what we want to do. But I say let the process go through with the Parking Commission.
Thank you. Jerry?
It's a good question what we do. I led the effort to create a parking commission after there's a parking study that the staff want to just move on to something like paid parking. So we made sure we created a commission that does have those diverse folks from downtown, citizens, business owners, et cetera. They've been working on this as for the last 6 months or more. They're looking now to have a public forum coming up sometime in May to engage the public before they make any recommendations. I also made sure we pulled the money out of the budget, $750,000 for the pilot study until we had a recommendation, and then council deals with it.
Thank you. Carl?
No, thank you very much on metered parking. The downtown merchants I've talked to said they'll move. I like them there. Let's not have meters there.
Thank you. Ward?
I was short. I'm going to step around this a little bit. We cannot maintain a quality of life here by building our city around the automobile. Right now, more than 60% of Fort Collins is either under roof or pavement. We will never maintain our quality of life and worry about traffic if we don't change urban form. We can develop in certain dense nodes connected by transit and make it people-oriented with bikes and pedestrian traffic. It's the only way. We got to make Fort Collins for people, not for cars.
You got to go. Thank you. Mike, who is on the Parking Advisory Board.
Yes, as Vice Chair of the Parking Board, I have an unfair advantage of everyone else. I've been at all the meetings, seeing all the input, and we're doing a very open, very authentic input. We don't have a predetermined outcome here, and in fact, that's in the minutes. We asked very specifically if we were supposed to have an outcome, and we don't. But the main driver that I'm seeing right now in our discussion is business, and so I'm personally very hesitant to ask the taxpayers to pay for something that's here to drive business revenue. I'd rather see the DDA do it if it's going to be business related, but not all the data is in yet, and we need to keep getting that data and look at it, and I encourage the public to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
One of the things we really need is to have the circulation, and I would be interested in going from the 2-hour to a 1-hour parking just to make sure that there's more turnover. I'm also concerned about going to on-street metered parking with the mall coming online. Basically, when the on-street parking meters left is when there was the mall that came online in the 1970s. So I think we have to be cognizant of a number of different things and not just jump to that solution.
All right, thank you very much. Well, would you like another question, or should we go to closing?
I would.
Closing?
Oh, I think we should have another question.
Another question? Okay. I got a million of them. City plan, and a lot of the city's long-range plans, call for development in the northeast part of the city, Mountain Vista area. It's supposed to go up there. And yet, one of the biggest constraints is the intersection of LeMay and Vine. What would you like to see happen there? Ray?
I think developing that area for the future, planning for the future is obviously key. So there's been a lot of discussion about an underpass and overpass. Something does have to happen. It does need to be realigned. Vine needs to be realigned to go around the neighborhood. And not the original plan as it was talked about years ago, a truck route, which was going to drive right through neighborhoods. So that's not the right plan. But I do think as development grows, you just can't say, well, we're just going to stop traffic. People still have to drive out that way where they live, and that growth area is still growing.
Thank you. Nancy?
We've certainly created some positives with some of the development that we've done already in the north end of town. This, however, will affect neighborhoods more than what we've done before, and I absolutely believe that the people who live in those neighborhoods must have a voice in what is done and how it's done.
Thank you. Eric?
The LeMay and Vine intersection is one of the grade-separated crossings on the Transportation Master Plan, and we do need to start a conversation about how we're going to fund that and the other grade-separated crossings.
Thank you. Kristen?
I think as we look at things like gentrification in some of these north neighborhoods, we need to make sure that we're protecting the historic neighborhoods that are there. And so I just want to make sure that we protect those neighborhoods as we develop around that area.
Thank you. Jerry?
The planning for the overpass there was done actually in the early 1990s, and I was involved in that. We did work with the neighborhoods, and we did make sure that it did not go through the neighborhoods, and actually will provide the neighborhoods, it won't have the road going there, it'll be going to the east. And again, I'd say the way to get that done is that community conversation for the next year, and also for tolling to pay for half of the cost of that. So it reduces the $35 million for taxpayers down to $17 million, and so those who use it will pay most of the money.
Thank you. Carl?
Not necessarily about the overpass. It's a capstone project. It's being brought to us by those Georgia carpetbaggers who brought us the summit. I'm very suspicious of them. It's 805 individual units, way too supersized. The folks there are rightly afraid of it, and I would not do it.
Thank you. Ward?
I think when we talk about quality of life, we can talk about all these individual things separately, but the reality is we have to look at our community as a whole. And we need to, if we're going to maintain quality of life, we have to maintain our character, and that means culture, that means smaller neighborhoods, smaller houses in certain areas. And again, we need to start thinking of what we want to be overall. We need to change the design concept. It's not going to be necessarily easy, but we have to make that effort and do it now.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I was on some of the Bob 2 working groups that were talking about this, and the conversation there was $30 million to enable development out in that area, and that intersection was stopping that development. And to me, again, from the economic development point of view, I don't like that aspect, and what I brought to the table there is we need to look at creating a net zero district out there and using this $30 million to do something that will actually enable the future and not keep the dinosaur on life support and actually move us into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade?
Yes, I support the realignment of both the Vine and LeMay, and that will actually really provide a neighborhood again for the Buckingham, Alta Vista, and Andersonville communities. So I think that would be a community enhancement that would really benefit those neighborhoods as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your answers. I think we'll go to closing remarks now. Each candidate will have 1 minute. Our timer is ready, and we'll start with Ray Martinez.
Thank you for my last statement. I really believe, first of all, on all the answers that we've been asked or the answers that I've given to the questions, I really believe that there has to be, first step is public engagement. So all of these involve that, and we have to have that public outreach. I really believe that this is about growth as a community, not growth of the community, and I think there's a remarkable difference of how we grow as people, how we build on people, and tearing down the walls and barriers of divisiveness and dissension, and all of a sudden it's us versus them. And I want to get away from that, and I think we can do that as a council, regardless of who's on council. I think we have to look at sensibility and civility when we talk about these issues, because they're hot topics. They're things that get under people's skin, they affect them personally. And I'm really about trying to not do that, but try to create a sense of community.
Thank you. Nancy Tellez.
First, I'd like to thank the Coloradoan for preparing and hosting this event and creating this opportunity for you to get to know us and for the people in Fort Collins to get to know us better. My history in Fort Collins has led me to greatly respect the lifestyle, cultures, and values of Fort Collins. And it motivates me to become involved in a new way in serving neighbors. Hence, I am here at this table. I will commit to addressing issues very seriously when they come to council. My first interest will be to be well informed about the issues, about the background and the implications for the city, and I will reach out to a broad spectrum of citizens to bring their views into the discussion so that decisions involve them. I would also like to thank Ray, who started us off on every single question.
Thank you, Nancy. Eric Cronwall.
Thank you. Thank you, CSU, for hosting this. It's great to be on campus, and thank you to the Coloradoan for hosting a growth forum, a very important topic to me and to my constituents in District 4. I've heard from a lot of people about concern about growth and its impact, and that really is, in my mind, the key issue for us as we move forward. My name is Eric Cronwall. I'm a candidate in District 4. I'm running to maintain balance. We have done a good job of fostering quality community and neighborhoods, a robust economy, protecting our natural environment, and I want to continue that, and that is why I'm running. I'm optimistic about our future, and I'm really excited to serve, and I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Kristen Stevens.
Hi, I'm Kristen Stevens, and I'm running for Fort Collins City Council in District 4. I'm running for Fort Collins City Council because I want to bring common sense solutions to Fort Collins and represent the views of working families in Fort Collins. I want to protect our natural areas, I want to protect our neighborhoods, and most of all, I want to protect our families. I have experience working on city and county boards, and have worked with CSU and with Poudre School District. I'll make sure we work together as a community and promote healthy dialogue and community involvement. As a community volunteer and as a mom, I'm used to rolling up my sleeves and getting things done, and that's exactly what I'll do on City Council. I'll fight hard for our families in Fort Collins. Please vote for me, Kristen Stevens, for City Council in District 4.
Thank you. Jerry Horak.
It's been a privilege and honor to serve on City Council the last 4 years. I've tried to really work hard on providing leadership and ideas to make sure I listen to people, to take each issue as it comes, to get the data and make decisions, no matter who the coalitions are that we vote with. I've tried to work on that to make sure we look at solutions and be pragmatic to what faces us and not just shout at a problem, but try to look at what can you do about it, how you can work on it, how you can move this community forward. So I'll continue to do this to make it a great place where we people can live, work, play, and recreate. I've made sure I've done that at times when I've taken what ones would say sometimes politically unpopular stands. That's in the near term. I try to look at the long term. What's best for the community? And I think that's what I've done, and I would be delighted to have a chance to do that again.
Thank you. Carl Wongzik.
Personal story. When I was headed to college, my mother, who was known for her humor and candor, gave me some very candid advice. She said, "You're not as smart as your older brother, and you're not as entertaining as your younger brother, but I think you're going to do fine because you're what they're calling these days a overachiever." Well, thank goodness she was right. I found out that I got satisfaction and joy from always doing more. In school, in the military, in teaching, in coaching, working with students, even in restoring our home to landmark it. It just felt good to do more. And that, in a nutshell, is my reason for being here. I want to do more for the town where I earned my living, where I raised my children, and where I hope my grandchildren will grow up. I appreciate your support and a vote in District 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ward Luthie.
Again, my name is Ward Luthie, and I'm running for mayor of Fort Collins. We've done a great job up till now at Fort Collins. If you look at planning, there reaches a point, though, where you continue to kind of slide downhill unless you take a different direction. As I've traveled around the world, I set up my company because I wanted to have a lot of adventures. I wanted to enjoy life to the fullest. I want to make sure that Fort Collins is just not a replica of every other city in the United States. We have everything right now to help us be the #1 leader in the United States for livability, but we're going to have to make some hard decisions. I want to bring the outdoors into Fort Collins, so this is where we want to live, we want to stay. And you have to listen, but you have to have a very strong vision of where you want to go. You can't just start over every 2 years or every 4 years and hope to have the community that you want to have for the rest of our lives. Again, I'm Ward Luthie. I'm running for mayor. I would love to have your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike Prusnick.
Hi, my name is Mike Prusnick, candidate for mayor. I started my career flying on a NASA research aircraft and writing air traffic control software for the FAA. I learned a lot about downside risk management. One of the things I like to brag about is when Stapleton moved to DIA, you couldn't get bags from one end of the airport to the other because that system was designed on upside potential like a typical government program. But we did not crash any airplanes because our system was engineered to eliminate downside risk. I've been very active in this community the last 2 years. Smart meters, zero waste, urban agriculture, fracking, asphalt. I mean, I can't even name them all. And what I see is that when we make those mistakes, when we hit those bumps in the road, it's because we were gambling on upside potential and forgot to take care of downside risk. And one of the things I bring to the table is that ability to look at downside risk. And the other thing I'll finish up on is the reason we launched Challenger in Columbia is because we put emotion ahead of the scientific data, the human factors data, and I will leave that ego at the door and follow the data where it tells us to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Wade Troxel.
I want to thank the Coloradoan and everybody that came out tonight. And I'm running for mayor to provide the leadership for a vibrant Fort Collins, looking to the future for all of Fort Collins citizens. And in providing that leadership, I do that in a practical, common sense sort of way to provide the leadership for the city council. We need to maintain the character and the values of our community and still maintain that we're a friendly, helpful, and caring community. I look forward to serving as mayor for Fort Collins, as I have served for the last 8 years on city council for District 4. So I ask for your vote on April 7th for mayor for Fort Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, Wade.
Well, we heard about affordable housing tonight. We talked about transportation. We talked about trains, overpasses and underpasses and potential. We talked about parking in Old Town. We talked about our neighborhoods. We talked about our neighbors. We talked about the stadium and the IGA, all growth-related issues, all really important issues for our community. And I want to thank you all for your perspectives this evening on those very important issues. So let's give you all a round of applause. Please. Thank you. As timekeeper, I'd like to also thank you for all staying on track. We finished early tonight. Early. That never happens at council, right? You never finish early. We'd also like to thank, council folks. You have a timer too, I think. We'd also like to thank CSU and student media for partnering with us to broadcast this event on CTV Channel 11. If you'd like to join us in the hallway, we hope candidates will stick around. We'll certainly stick around. Members of the Coloradoan staff will be available for questions. You can ask Dugan a few if you like. Get back at him. We look forward to continuing this conversation in the days and weeks to come ahead of the election on April 7th. We'll have a story posted about this discussion on our website this evening. That's Coloradoan.com. And if you'd like to see all of our election-related content, it's at Coloradoan.com/elections. And then we'll also have that story in tomorrow's paper as well. And one final note from me and from us, all of us, I would say I would not be alone in making this ask, but please talk to folks, remind them that the election is April 7th. You'd be surprised how many people I talk to who are not aware that we've got an election coming on April 7th. Remind them that mail-in ballots are due and encourage them to participate in this critical process. That's all I've got. Thanks again to our candidates.